This is your host, Swapnil Bhartiya, and welcome to Let's Talk. Abby Kearns, CTO of Puppet, has joined the advisory board of Loft Lab. And today we have with us, of course, Abby and Lukas Gentele, co-founder and CEO of Loft Lab. Lukas, Abby, it's great to have you both on the show.
It's great to be here.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Swapnil. It's a pleasure chatting with you again.
We have covered Loft since its early days, but to refresh the memories of our viewers, just tell us quickly, what is the company all about? What problem are you trying to solve for the industry?
Yeah, so what we're essentially doing is helping companies, to take Kubernetes adoption internally from, 10 to 20 users up to 10,000 engineers, essentially. So we're really targeting the large enterprise and, everything from self-service over multi-tenancy, over, collaboration and developer experience. We're trying to, essentially add value at all of these different parts that large organizations need to really roll out Kubernetes to, essentially all of their engineers.
Thanks for telling me about the company. And today's focus is more on Abby. So can you tell me a bit about Lukas? How did you come in contact with her, and what made you to invite her to the board of advisory?
Yeah, essentially, I met Abby in the very early days of the company, essentially. That was even before we incorporated the company in the United States. We were applying for this accelerator program at UC Berkeley. It's called Skydeck. It's a fantastic program. I can definitely tell that now going through it, but when we applied for it, we actually didn't know it so well. And in the initial interview, when they flew us over here, and we were the first time in Berkeley talking to them, they asked us, "Hey, we have this advisor network. Who do you want to talk to?" So we pulled up this backup slide in our pitch deck, and we said, "Hey, here's 5 or 10 people or so that we definitely want to talk to." And Abby was on the top of that list. And Caroline, which is the director of Skydeck, essentially said like, "Oh, Abby is the perfect person for you to talk to. I'm going to make an intro right away." And we weren't even in the program yet. We weren't accepted to the accelerator yet. She just pulled out her laptop, sent an email to Abby, and Abby got back to us in like 30 minutes or so. And we were really surprised that the bond, between, Skydeck and Abby was so strong. And we met Abby, I think 2 or 3 days later in San Francisco in a cafe. And she's been part of our journey ever since.
When you talked to them, what value did you see in the company back then? And now you have joined the board. How do you see, first of all, what value do you see in the company? What potential you saw that? And how you see their journey so far?
The one thing that really got me back then, and I will say the company has pivoted a couple of times since then, but what really got me excited is they were really trying to solve the problem. And Swapnil, you and I have talked about this for years and years and years. Kubernetes is complicated in the best of circumstances. And, Lukas and his co-founders from day one really wanted to figure out, how do we make Kubernetes easier to run and use? And at the end of the day, even several years ago, that was an emerging problem. Today, it's even more complicated. And as environments get more and more complex, running and managing Kubernetes at scale is really hard to do for the most talented of people, even those that have, spent a lot of time in the Kubernetes community, but more so now as more and more enterprises are starting to run Kubernetes environments, particularly larger Kubernetes environments, that problem has just gotten exponentially more complex. And so, at the end of the day, even though Loft Labs and Lukas and team have pivoted and evolved the company over time, the heart of it has always been, how do we make Kubernetes easier to run and manage? And that's something I've been really excited about for years, because it's been a problem we've talked about since the early days of Kubernetes. And it's one that I think, Loft is the most well-positioned to address.
What does this new role at Loft as advisor mean? What exactly will you be doing there?
Just helping Lukas and his founding team be successful at the end of the day, answering questions, just giving advice. A lot like I've been doing the last several years, honestly. Just really, particularly though, as Loft is getting positioned to really scale up the company and do more, it's just really be a great partner for Lukas and the team as they begin the next level of their journey.
You have been part of the industry for so long. You have wore different hats. You have been at the foundation, profit foundation, you have been in commercial companies. So if you look at your own journey, where you have helped organizations, solve this problem. So can you just like kind of quickly reflect on your own journey that kind of empowers you to help folks like Loft?
For those of us that have been in industry for a long time, I've been in tech over 20 years. And as you pointed out, I've had a breadth of experience across the board. I've had a lot of different jobs in technology over the years. For me, I just feel like the best thing I can do is start to share that advice more broadly. Lessons learned along the way, usually from missteps versus, and just say, look, I've tried this didn't work, but hey, you might look at this. Or, like you said, I've spent a lot of time in the open source world. Lessons learned from open source or how to navigate open source foundations or ecosystems, or, I've spent all of my career in enterprise infrastructure. So how do you navigate getting into the enterprise, selling to the enterprise, and then supporting that journey? So at the end of the day, I just hope I can share some useful nuggets every now and then. But at the end of the day, I really love to spend time with startups and founders like Lukas. And I get a lot of value out of getting that opportunity.
Since you mentioned open source, let's talk about open source for a while. And this is a question for both of you, and maybe Abby or Lukas, whoever you can start. I mean, we live in a world where a majority of software, even hardware, is open source, but there is still, a lot of closed source code. Companies are still playing with the licenses. But if I ask you folks, is open source the right way to go, especially if someone like Lukas is building a company to solve real problems, it's not open source for the sake of open source? Does open source come in the way, or it becomes a stepping stone for companies who want to create commercial solutions?
Lukas has been thinking about open source since the beginning. A lot of the work that Lukas and team started developing was really started in open source. And, at the end of the day, I think there is a tremendous amount of value that you can gain as a bigger company, but even as an early stage startup in open source. There's an opportunity to figure out product market fit, get really fast feedback from a broad and diverse community, and really understand how to deliver real value to your eventual end users. And so I think there's a lot of value that can be gained. Now, it's not without its own challenges, obviously, particularly if you're trying to build a company around open source and want to make money. You have to really figure out how to navigate what goes in open source, what do you commercialize, and how do you build a company around that commercial opportunity. And I do think Lukas has done a fantastic job of walking that fine line really well. Lukas spends a ton of time with the community and understanding community adoption and engagement. And so I think from that perspective, there's a ton of value that I think Lukas has learned along the journey. But, Lukas, and I'll let you speak to this, you've done a really great job of also avoiding some of the key pitfalls with open source.
Yeah, I think for us, open source is probably not even a decision, right? In the kind of CNCF ecosystem, there's so much open source tooling out there that it's almost like a requirement to be, part of this ecosystem that you're contributing to open source, whether that's your own projects or if you're contributing to Docker or Kubernetes or any of the projects out there. I think for us, it's kind of like we said, Abby, the most valuable part is really the tight engagement with users. If I compare myself, like looking in, different SaaS tools, for example, I don't always even find like a way to give feedback, right? For open source, it's pretty clear, right? Everybody knows, hey, there's a GitHub repository, people open issues, there's a Slack channel, and that direct interaction with users is super valuable. Regarding building the business, I think we made the decision to not use an open core model. We essentially have 4 open source projects, which are standalone, work without our commercial product. And our commercial product is not some kind of enterprise version of any of these projects. It's independent project, right? So we're working on 1 commercial product and then 4 open source products. And the commercial products using these open source projects internally, and it might make it easier a little bit to tie those 4 projects together. But we're not in that open core dilemma where someone is wanting to contribute some enterprise feature and we're like, hey, you can't contribute that because it's in our enterprise plan. I think that's a really big benefit. And I think that's the fine line that you were mentioning, Abby, like in terms of like really strategizing around what is commercial, what is open source, and how to tell users, where's essentially the line. And I think it's really important to not get users in this position that they're frustrated, right? If they have a great feature idea, it should be valuable for both sides. And that's definitely the case for us.
Abby, I'll go back to you. Looking at your role at both Puppet and Loft, is there any kind of crossover there? Will you be kind of, playing a role, building a bridge between the two companies?
I don't think there's any crossover per se, but I think there's a lot of learnings that I get along the way. I learn a lot from the work that Lukas and team are doing with Kubernetes, and for Puppet, obviously we're focusing on automation for infrastructure. So that next level down, but we're also, we've spent the last year replatforming on top of Kubernetes. So really there's a lot of learnings that I get out of getting to spend time with Lukas and team on the work they're doing. And, it also helps me keep a closer eye on what's happening in the emergent ecosystem around cloud native and open source cloud native. There's a lot of work still left to do. We haven't solved all of the problems in open source yet. And so it's a really great opportunity to really be part of that evolution, which, I think we're still, 6 years into probably a 20-year journey as we think about the reemergence of what infrastructure is going to look like in the future. And obviously Loft is one of many companies that are leading the way on that work, but the hope is that Puppet continues to build on that and learn from that as a company, and we continue to innovate around those areas as well.
Lukas, if I ask you, since the foundation of the company, what kind of adoption have you seen as we are talking, suddenly there is a rush towards cloud and digital transformation, which also means there are a lot of people who are looking at Loft technologies. So talk about the adoption. What have you experienced or seen so far?
Yeah, we're actually pretty impressed. So when we've built a couple of open source tools before we launched our commercial product Loft. But since we launched Loft, that's pretty much about a year ago, we've seen adoption in really large enterprises. And, even in the government sector, we're, essentially selling to some of the biggest companies in this country. And, that's super exciting. There have been feature requests, which I, couldn't even, dreamt of like a year ago or so, right? People asking for installing Loft in, high security air gap data centers and things like that, right? Which is obviously very challenging to do for us as a small team. But it's on the other side, super, super exciting that we're getting that adoption. And I think, especially with virtual Kubernetes clusters and our project V cluster, we're taking that even to another level by open sourcing. I think that's kind of how we see our product as well. When we see opportunities to open source a certain slice of it, we do it, just because that is essentially opening up new opportunities for adoption and also collaboration with other companies. And I think vCluster is an excellent example that is just going to fuel further adoption of our product.
What's your long-term plan or goal with Loft? What vision do you have for the company?
Yeah, right now we're really focused on being kind of a leader in this Kubernetes multi-tenancy space, right? There are so many challenges around, sharing Kubernetes clusters and having shared workloads on top of Kubernetes. That's what we're ultra focused on today. But ultimately, I see the company, revolving around two, major topics. One is self-service around Kubernetes, and the other one is developer experience. So really like an end-to-end experience for engineers to work with those technologies.
Excellent. Of course, KubeCon is around the corner. I do hope that all this COVID mess is cleaned up by then so that we can attend that in person. We'll see what happens with Delta and Lambda or whatever. But are you folks planning to attend KubeCon? What are your plans for KubeCon?
Yeah, definitely going to attend KubeCon. I'm actually going to be a speaker at KubeCon as well. I'm going to talk about the future of Kubernetes multi-tenancy, and I'm going to talk about how virtual clusters can essentially solve a lot of the issues that we're having today with multi-tenancy. And yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have a booth as well let's see if it's actually going to happen in person. We don't know, like everything's changing every week, I guess. But I'm pretty optimistic at this point, at least.
We actually are sending people, assuming in person still happens, we're sending people in person, as well as we have a bunch of people that are attending virtually as well. Obviously, Kubernetes is something we talk about a lot internally. But, for me, KubeCon represents more than just Kubernetes. Obviously, it talks about a lot of the emergence and evolution of the other open source cloud native technologies. And so at the end of the day, it's always good to keep an eye on what's happening.
Abby, Lucas, thank you so much for taking time out today and talk about both companies, and especially Abby, you joining the advisory board of the company to further guide them. So thanks for talking about the company, and I would love to have you both on the show, and hopefully we'll see you at KubeCon.